Hi, I can hear you, boss. This is Yoni, but I'm driving, so I cannot put on my...
Okay, so first of all, it's great that you joined us. I will take a few seconds to introduce you as a stealth participant, and if you would like, you will be able to participate in the conversation, since we're going to have it as a kind of open discussion. But still, we have 1 minute to 7, so we'll give a chance to the last one to join us.
Also, in case my internet acts weird, don't worry, I will join from 4G from my phone, because sometimes in the last days the internet has been acting up. Okay, and Leo, I'm gonna make you a co-host as well, you know, just to have some responsible adult here around. So if
sure thing,
one of us will be thrown out or whatever. Okay, so now it's 7, and first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody that joined us to the platform of Zoom to Freedom, which is an open platform to discussion, lectures, events that relate to individual and economical freedom. And today we have a special guest, Nikos Sotirakopoulos. Nikos? How I did it?
Hi everyone. Greetings from Athens.
Yeah, and Nikos is an instructor and a visiting fellow at the Ayn Institute. He holds a PhD from University of Kent in UK, and he has been teaching in UK universities for about 10 years. Today we will discuss an article, I would say almost classic article, one of Ayn Rand's best articles. The article titled, or the essay titled, The Anti-Industrial Revolution. It was first published in 1971. And just, you know, just for a glimpse, I want to show you something from 1970, so you'll get the sense of how was it at that time. This is a piece of Israeli newspaper that reads, the concentration of DDT within the tissues of the average Israeli is threatening our life. And the ecological, our demon is threatening our life, and the human race have only 130 years to stay on Earth. This is one of the respectable newspapers in Israel at the time. So, and this is only the edge of the waves that spread through the United States and Europe. And basically, this is the time that the ecological movement start to pick up steam and become to be one of the most prominent movement, intellectual and civil movement of our time. And today it's actually affects every aspect of our life, from our electricity bill to the way we drive car, to the way we drink our Coca-Cola with a straw and whatever. So Nikos, give us your perspective on this article and the movement that grew out of it.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this being a discussion rather than a lecture, because no one likes Zoom lectures. So let's make this as interactive as possible. So setting the context, I think it's how prophetic this talk is quite an intellectual achievement for Ayn Rand. Because think about this. Today we know, in the year 2022, we know that the environmental movement is the most successful social movement, I would say, ever. If you compare it with any other movement, with communism, with feminism, with nationalism, no other movement caught up so quickly within 3-4 decades, and no other movement became so mainstream. You can find politicians today who tell you, I'm not a leftist, I'm not a nationalist, I'm not a feminist. It's almost impossible to find someone who tells you I'm not an environmentalist. So with the hindsight, in retrospect, in 2022, we know that this is a movement which has captured the heart and the minds of almost everyone in the West, and not only in the West. Ayn Rand writes this essay, delivers this essay, which then becomes an article, in 1971. Now, this means we're only 1 year after the introduction of the first Earth Day. So first Earth Day 1970, Ayn Rand delivers this in 71. 1971, the world doesn't even know yet of Greenpeace. Greenpeace at that point is still called Don't Make a Wave Committee. So it's a movement mostly in the eyes of most of in the world. Environmentalism is a movement of hippies, of people with beards and people who are outsiders. So it's interesting to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who go and watch this talk by Ayn Rand in 71. They expect, probably they don't expect what's coming to them. They say, what, this, we barely know any environmentalists, they would say. So why is he telling us this precautionary tale? So before we even get to the article, for me, one of the most interesting thing is how in tune Rand was with the environmental movement. That's the first thing. The other thing is that at that point, mostly when we talk about the environmental movement, or as it was called then, the ecology movement, people are thinking about the movement against pollution, or as you said, the movement against DDT, a movement against chemicals. So in the mind of most people, this is a movement for a better human environment. This is a movement so that we have a better health. And Ayn Rand says, no. If you see the premises of this movement, this is a movement which has a very clear anti-human element. And again, in 71, it's like, where did this come from? We still haven't seen the deep ecology movement, the movement that says that nature has an inherent value. We still haven't seen the radical environmentalism. We haven't seen Earth First or primitivism environmentalism and all that stuff. So it's the first thing for me that jumps out is what a great insight in what environmentalism really is about. And then we need to ask the question, how did Rand predict that? Was it just that she was a brilliant mind? And my answer is no, it's not just that she's just a brilliant mind. And it's something that she actually makes clear in the text, in the speech. And this is, to understand the movement, you have to take its ideas seriously. And this is something which we say, okay, obviously I take the idea seriously, and yet we don't. So quite often, when we have a radical movement, we say, look, these people look nice, these people look friendly, these are like smiley young faces when we go out in the streets and we see like Greenpeace activists coming to us, like young girls, hey, do you care about saving the whales? Of course I care about saving the whales, whales are beautiful. And we tend to give the benefit of the doubt. And we tend to say things like, come on, when they go to extremes, they don't really mean it. Or I live in a country, for example, which has a very strong communist left. And we have the same way to deal with the communist left. Say, look, they don't really mean that they want to bring communism or that they want to get rid of private property. It's mostly idealistic young people. And the same is the tendency with the environmentalists. And Ayn Rand says, no, you have to take them seriously. And to persuade us to take them seriously, she starts this essay with this dystopian future, with this story. And by the way, this is like a lesson on how to motivate your audience. She doesn't start by saying, well, according to my data, the environmental movement is this, or she starts with a story that really shocks you. She starts with a story that talks to you. It says, this is going to be your life. Your life basically is going to, life as you know it is going to be done. Life as you know it is going to be a chore. Life as you know it is going to be very, very difficult. Why? If you take these ideas seriously, if you let these people get away with these ideas. And then she has this very beautiful line where she says, if someone proposed to reduce you to the state I described, in that story says in the beginning, you would scream in protest. Why don't you? It is being proposed loudly, clearly, and daily all around you. So this is for me the most important part of the story. The most important part of the story is not that environmentalism is bad or that it goes too far or that it's a new way to attack capitalism. We mostly know all these things. For me, the most important thing in this essay, in this speech, because the reason was a speech, is this thing that ideas have consequences. That it doesn't have to be that someone is profound, is openly going to tell you, I'm going to ruin your life and your life's going to be miserable. But if you follow these ideas, if you follow the idea that says that what is our aim should be less human impact on the environment. What would less human impact on the environment mean? Oh, it would mean less of human activity. Okay, but how do humans flourish? How do humans develop? By intervening more and more in the environment. So if we intervene less in the environment, how is our life is going to be? And she gives the concrete. She gives this story of this couple that from the moment they wake up till the night when they go to bed, their life is unimaginably worse than our life is now. Because some of the things that we can take for granted and some of the things that this movement is challenging, some of the things that this movement considers as bad are taken away from us. So there's more to say on this essay. I will get a bit.
I will say something.
Yeah, Boaz, tell me.
A short statement about it, that if we go back to basic, to the philosophical aspect of what is a human being, something that Nikos started to discuss. Basically, as Aristo put it, a human being is the rational animal, which means our unique ability is to think. It's not by having a special ability to run, very strong muscles, have a thick fur that will protect us from the cold, or some other mechanism like a camel that protects us from the heat. This is the other animals that adjust to the environment or perish. The human being adjusting the environment to his needs, and this is the basic difference between a rational animal and maybe genetical animal. The fact that a human being is a being that collects more data, more information, we have more knowledge than our ancestor. This is not something that we encounter in the kingdom of animals. You know, if you see a bird, she's not much more smarter than her grandmother bird or whatever in 20 years ago. So basically, this is the way human beings flourish. They gather information, they learn more about the environment. What we call resource is the ability to gather knowledge and change the environment in a way that will serve us for our flourishing. And this is exactly what the statement that we don't want to have a human footprint. We don't want to have a change. This is exactly what it's attack. It's attack the core essence of what is to be a human. And in this respect, this is anti-humanistic even to claim that this is an ideal, not to change. Now, the concept of not changing, this is, of course, rest on ancient mythologies from the Garden of Eden and other mythologies that you shouldn't change. You've been put there, and this is what you have to be satisfied with. Don't ask questions. Don't change it, otherwise you will be punished. At ancient time, it was the punishment of banishment from the Garden of Eden. Now it's the punishment of Mother Nature that will come to hunt us with a terrible disaster. And of course, today the environmental movement is the movement that produced the most prolific, I would say, doomsday prophecies that ever been. They actually inherit the role of the prophet, the biblical prophet of doom. So this is in general, and Nikos, please take it from here, and I'll continue later.
So based on what you said, Boaz, so Rand does something which is quite unusual for Ayn Rand. She refers to human beings as the most fragile product of nature. So we are used to Ayn Rand presenting human beings as heroes, as titans. So why fragile? Fragile because, as you said, our conditions of existence require that we use our mind, because this is our most potent weapon. As you said, we are not fast, we're not strong. And this is what the environmentalists do not take into accordance. So, and particularly after 1970, particularly after Ayn Rand gave that speech, with the rise of the deep ecology, which says that human beings are just one of all the other animals in nature. It's just one part of the ecosystem. They are not, though, because if we just were another part of the ecosystem, we would survive in the same way as the other animals would survive. But the truth is that we don't. So, and this, the fact that the environmentalists don't take this into accordance, shows to us why there cannot be such a thing as what they call sustainable development, or progress which is going to be measured. So we're going to progress just a little bit, but not too much. Because progress is not something that can be centrally planned and centrally controlled. You cannot control the human mind. And this is something that the environmentalists are missing in the same way that the Marxists are missing. So what is the big mistake that the Marxists are making? They say, wealth is over there, the factories, the wealth has been created, now the workers need to take it over. What do the ecologists say? The ecologists are saying, well, nature is giving us resources and we go and take them, but we have to make sure that we leave also some resources for future generations, or we don't deplete the resources of nature. So both of them are making the same fundamental mistake. Both of them don't realize that no, resources are not out there. Factories did not come from space. Someone had to create them. And those who are the ones who created them did this by using their minds. And if you don't allow them to using their mind, you're not going to have factories, you're not going to have, quote, resources. So this also is a prediction about what would be the future under the environmental principles being in action. It would be a future of less, not a future of, quote, sustainable development, which is the slogan, let's say, of the environmental movement. So,
well, I'll mention just an anecdote of today. Today, our Minister of Energy tweet a special congratulation for a new finding of gas reservoir in the Mediterranean. However, a few months ago, the same minister held back and actually freeze a new permits to excavate and to look for a new reservoir of gas in the Israeli economical water at the Mediterranean. So it was a very strange, I would say, contradiction in the Israeli policy, and we see that she is under immense pressure, I guess. She realized how good it is, how useful it is to find more gas, and how important it is to the safety of all of us, especially when we look on the geopolitical event of the last few months. The invasion to Ukraine couldn't happen if the West was not handicapped, and at least Putin could consider the NATO countries as a subject of his will and dependent on his goodwill to supply them with gas. So actually what we did by holding back the development of new sources of reliable energy, of new real energy and not unstable green energy, is that we drove the free world into a very difficult position of being handicapped in front of tyrant, in front of country bullies around the world that have no reservation of using any mean they could. So this is one of the implications of this whole agenda that affect us all. I don't know if Jonathan Duby is a professor of chemistry in Ben-Gurion University, and he sees a unique perspective of an academic who trying to, in a way, to lower down the flame of doom that all his colleagues are throwing around. And Yoni, if you can join us and give us your perspective, it will be very interesting. If not, I will ask Lior maybe to give his...
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, Nikos. Thank you for this very nice introduction. Super interesting. I have to admit that I'm not familiar with the original text of Ayn Rand on the Antidote, but it rings a complete bell. And so as Boz mentioned, I've been thinking a lot and, working publicly to try to get people to understand that power, whether it comes from electricity or it comes from directly from the source, via heating or things like that, is essential for human flourishing. And you cannot get power without changing nature. That's just not something you do, because from a thermodynamic perspective, there is no way to do that. So a flourishing of humans means the use of power, and the use of power, almost by definition, implies some form of change that we afflict upon nature. And I think that there is a strange situation now where I hear a lot of people from the environmental movement, in some degree, because there's a range of a spectrum of believers, I would say, that they are clinging to the idea that you can, in fact, produce power without affecting nature. And of course, this is against all data and against common sense. And it's very difficult, I find, to get that point. And I'm wondering, and I'm hoping that the philosophers, this is Nikos and Boaz, can give me maybe an angle to try not only to persuade, but to allow people to look at this from a different perspective. Because I bore people to death with data and graphs and supply chains and things like that. So maybe your input on this, Nikos, would be very useful.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. So I think, first of all, also numbers are and graphs are very important, because so environmentalism has two very strong weapons. One is, and we're going to discuss in a second, which is their moral claims. And the second is this appearance that they represent science. Now, of course, with the second, we have to be careful. We have to be very precise, very accurate. I see many people, for example, who are skeptical about the movement, suddenly making claims like, oh, there is no global warming, or these models are flawed. And of course, they have zero expertise. So we have to be very, very careful to be very just and be very objective with what the data are and how we can interpret them. But their most potent weapon is not numbers and is not science. And I can give you one precise example which shows that they have something which is more potent than science. It never manages to impress me, the discussion around plastic straws. Now, me being Greek and an enjoyer of frappe and of our summery coffee drinks, the plastic straw was super, super central to our economy and to our enjoyment of life. And then just like that, a year ago or so, they disappeared. Now, if you look at the data, what is the percentage of not plastic straws, of plastic in general in the ocean that comes, for example, from Greece, it's a number which is minuscule, because the vast majority of waste in the ocean comes from particular continents, particular countries. Hint, Greece is not one of them, mostly from China and Asia. And actually something like a big percentage of all the plastics that are in the ocean are the result of events such as the tsunami of 2004 or the tsunami in Japan, because obviously a tsunami, as it comes out, it brings huge amounts of waste with them. So you go to one of these people who advocate the banning of plastic straws and you tell them, look, the percentage of plastic straws in the ocean is 0.000000000 lines of 0.1%. Why do we need to ban them? And you know what their answer is going to be. Well, we have to do something. At least we're doing something. And then you ask, wait a minute. Is this a movement about actually making sure that the water is clean or that we don't pollute nature? Or is it a movement where we whip ourselves and say, well, at least we're doing something? So the biggest impact, the biggest success factor of the environmental movement is not the data. If it were the data, they would be in favor, for example, of nuclear energy. If it was all comes down to the data, they wouldn't make the plastic straw campaign such high on the list. But what makes this movement so successful is that it kind of triggers this button on you, which says you have to sacrifice. You have to give up. You've gone too far. You have too much. And this is how Rand predicted that it would be successful, because these premises are very popular. My grandmother knew nothing about environmentalism, never heard about it in her life, probably wouldn't agree also because she would think this is like hippie stuff of the West. And yet, she would repeat the same slogans. We've gone too far, humanity is Icarus who has flew too high, and we have pissed off God. Well, the environmentalists would say we have pissed off nature, but the message is the same. And this is what is most powerful in environmentalism. Take away these elements, disarm them on the moral level, and they're left with little. Then we're left with the real problems. Pollution is a real problem. Climate change is a real problem. These are real problems, but these are issues that can't be dealt with without dismantling of our industrial civilization and without dismantling of capitalism. So that's their most potent weapon. Their most potent weapon is that they stand in the shoulders of giants, in terms of shoulders of a morality that has been prominent forever, and very easily we can say sacrifice not for your neighbor, but sacrifice for the developing world, sacrifice for the future generations, or at the end of the day, sacrifice for the polar bears. Why not? If sacrifice is a virtue, then sacrificing for something as distant from you as possible is an even higher virtue.
Yeah, I would say also that as a tactical tool, when the green movement say we need to stop, we reach too far, it's never asking us to stop 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why exactly today? Because people understand that they would not like to give away their wealth, their phones, their computers, their internet, their cars, you know, because if we've gone too far, why not stop 20 years ago before the internet, or 30 years ago, before, or maybe 50 years ago, before certain procedure and Medicare advancement, and so on. So usually they don't let people to face the consequences of stopping, because we don't know what was not invented yet. But of course, it's from here on. I would like also to ask to introduce Dr. Leo Reshbal, who is with us in the conversation, and to mention one important data about Leo Reshbal. He's actually translating nowadays Alex Epstein's book, the fossil future to Hebrew. So he may have some perspective also from working on the book. If you can say something, Leo, join us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Nikos. I would address you as doctor in your last name, but I don't want to embarrass myself.
Don't worry, Nikos will do.
Yeah.
So so it's a real privilege to translate Epstein's book to Hebrew. So first of all, the book is really good. Hopefully people here know Alex Epstein is one of the more prolific thinkers in the field of energy over the past decade. He's written his first book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, which came out 2013, if I'm not mistaken, which really changed my perspective on this. I will speak about it in just a second, but I lost the camera. Just to make sure you can still hear me well.
Yeah, and can see you now. Yeah.
So his sophomore book, which is should be coming out the end of May, the end of this month. I'm now translating it, which I'm really happy to have his words in Hebrew, because his first book hasn't seen the light of day in Hebrew. So that's the first time he has a book presented in Israel. And what he's doing is actually taking the philosophy of Ayn Rand and completely making it accessible to everyone, because Ayn Rand isn't mentioned there anywhere. Objectivism isn't mentioned there anywhere. Just very, very good thinking about energy. And to me, it was a good experience to get in there, because I did my studies here in the Technion in Israel. The Technion is the institution of technology, is the highest place you can go to if you want to learn about engineering and science here in Israel. And I had my PhD in energy engineering because I was two things. I was really excited about energy and also very much motivated by fear because of stories of climate change. That was a decade ago. And something was missing, and I came across Epstein's writing, and I had no idea about Ayn Rand, nothing. And his writing is just so good. And the point of all of it is there are two sides to the conversation. The side that wants to progress human flourishing, which should be most of humanity, and then a major side of anti-humanistic philosophy. And hopefully to have those writings in Hebrew will further make it accessible to Israelis.
Yeah. So thank you, Leo, and we're looking forward for the results of your work, and of course, it's going to be a great contribution to the discussion in Israel. I see Amit raising hand, and I like to open the stage also for the visitor of the conversation. Please, Amit, introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Boaz. So I'm Amit, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I wanted to ask a follow-up question for the previous discussion for Nikos. So as you mentioned, there are two issues here, the scientific issue and the moral issue. And basically the scientific issue says that the cost is bigger than the benefits of all the energy production, and the planet will become unlivable for our children in the future. So my question is, if we think hypothetically that the scientific assertion of the environmentalists is correct, what would be the right approach?
Yeah, that's the most important question. That's $1 million question. So if it were for sure, and let's take it for now that it is for sure, that the future will be difficult for our children, that is going to be significantly warmer and all that stuff. What should be the first question we should ask? The first question we should ask is, if we go with your solution, you're selling to the environmentalists, if we go with your solution, if we cut down CO2, if we significantly cut down our reliance on fossil fuels, Don't give me the data in terms of how much CO2 we're going to cut down. Give me the data in terms of what is the impact we're going to have on the actual temperature. And for example, with the Kyoto Protocol, the impact, the actual impact we would have on climate change would be delaying it for 5 years. So we would spend all these billions, all these trillions, and as Bjorn Lomborg would put it, the guy in Bangladesh who would drown in the year 2100 would drown in the year 2105. So the first point would be, look, if indeed you take this so seriously, and you should take it seriously, your solution is useless. Your solution is going to give us is going to leave us more exposed. Your solution is going to leave us poorer, and it's not going to do anything about the actual issue. So you would expect that if someone really took this threat seriously, they would be talking the big picture and would think big. Think big means nuclear energy, and think big means rapid development, particularly of the developing world. And it would also mean geoengineering. It would also mean that if it comes to that, we find ways to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere with artificial trees, with artificial plantation. There are ways. There are various ways, or bombarding the clouds with salty water so that they absorb more sun. So we would be talking these big things. Think about this way. If there was an asteroid coming to Earth, we would put everything on the table. How can we stop this? So the mystery here is the same people who are telling you that the planet is going to be uninhabitable, unlivable for our children, they offer solutions that are doing very little, if anything, to address the problem. And at the same time, they leave us more exposed. So I would say, look, if you take the data seriously, then you have to be serious. And be serious means we have to solve the problem and not be poorer after we have allegedly addressed the problem. So that's why I cannot take very seriously the idea that these people truly believe that the planet is going to be uninhabitable, or they really care to solve it. Probably they do believe it because they are motivated by fear, but then why are they paralyzed in terms of offering solutions that are not solutions?
Yeah. Okay.
And also, by the way, sorry, I mentioned the Kyoto Agreement. Also with the Paris Agreement, its impact on the weather at the end of the century would be 0.something degrees Celsius. But then they will say, oh, this is only a first step. So how many steps of changing the temperature by 0.0 something would you have to take to have a significant impact on the weather, if indeed the weather is going to make the Earth uninhabitable? So that's why I cannot take them seriously, because that's a question that is never being asked. Always the question is, how much are we going to cut? You never hear the question being asked, how much is the impact going to be actually in the weather in terms of degrees? How much are we going to delay the climate change? Is it going to be delayed 5 years, or is it going to be delayed 55 years? So these are the questions that we should ask, and these are the questions that are almost never asked, except by heterodox thinkers like Bjorn Lomborg or Alex Epstein.
And
or Michael Saleh, I can't pronounce his name. The guy who's running also from California.
Schellenberg.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, what we see also in respect to the global event nowadays is that in Europe they burn more coal nowadays, and the reason that they cut the development of gas and nuclear, which could be cleaner and more wealthy, a better source of energy according to their own agenda. So this is one of the mysteries, is really in the countries and places that have the ability to develop nuclear power, why don't they do that? And why, instead of developing a real, let's say, reliable energy, they put a huge amount of money in unreliable energy, which actually damage the whole energy system.
And let me ask you one more question, Boaz. Let's say with nuclear, let's say there is this small amount of risk, what there's an accident, what we do with nuclear waste, although these questions are very easily answered. Isn't it curious that some of these people who oppose nuclear also oppose the most potent renewable form of energy, which is hydro energy? You can find big environmental organizations in the US, for example, opposing hydroelectric energy, opposing dams. Why? Because of the impact on the ecosystem. So next time someone tells you, oh, Ayn Rand is straw-manning the argument of the environmentalists, they just want to preserve a better environment for human lives, ask them this very simple question. Why is it then that so many prominent environmentalists oppose even hydroelectric energy? And the only answer possible is that they oppose any intervention of human beings on their environment. Now, to be fair, there are many environmentalists, more and more of those who take seriously the problem, who have turned their position and are now in favor of nuclear. George Monbiot is an example in the UK, who otherwise is a figure who's like an World War-like figure in terms of his influence and his bad ideas. But at least on that point, he has changed their mind in nuclear. So for me, nuclear energy is the litmus test to see if these people are really interested about stopping climate change or stopping the impact we have on the atmosphere, or if they just have an anti-human perspective and an anti-human, nihilistic or misanthropic agenda. So if they're in favor of nuclear energy, you can say, okay, there's some basis here. If they're against, you have to ask questions. You have to ask, okay, what are you after? What do you want then? What is your goal?
Yeah, and of course there is the element. One of the things that I mentioned in the article that I recently wrote, in order to accommodate the Earth Day, that 52 year of celebration for Earth Day, was the I would say theological argument that accompanied the green movement. And the theological arguments goes back to Pascal, in argument that called Pascal wager, that convinced the listener why should he become to be a believer. And the way that Pascal, Blaise Pascal, who was a French philosopher and mathematician, formulated is that since since you're going to be punished if you're not going to believe in God, to eternal hell, and it will be a terrible suffering, it's worthwhile. I mean, it's rational to believe in God, because, you know, even if it's uncomfortable, you're not sure, life is short, but then there is eternity of suffering. So so if there is God, you will inherit heaven. If there is no God, then okay, it was a short life and you didn't suffer too much from become a believer. So become a believer, what do you have to lose? You know, and this is what called also, it's also reflected in what we call the precautionary principle. I mean, why do you look for developing more oil, or why do you look for drilling? It might cause some problem, you know, so let's take precaution. But anyway, so the environmental movement use the same argument. What they're saying is that first, they're using the fallacy of eternity, like there is eternal hell. They say, if we will not change our way, there will be a hell come on us, something that will be unrecoverable, uninhabitable, world will be lost, the human race will be lost. Now, whatever will be, I think the human race survive much harsher situation during the Ice Age and without technology, and, you know, with a very little tools to assist, with no medicine, with no knowledge, with in a very primitive level of existence, and human race survive. But anyway, the promise is that we will perish, and since then it doesn't we don't have to consider the amount of money we pour, the suffering we're going to suffer. All of this is short and small in comparing to the eternity of losing the world. And this is the, I would say, the theological element, and I see it especially installed within young mind of children in high school that suffer from fears that are actually real. There is a real suffering of kids that are afraid that there is no future for them. They can quit school because what the point of studying if there is no way to use the knowledge you acquire in school? There is no future. And this is, by the way, what we see in children like Greta Thunberg, and we see it in children around the world. And of course, they are all getting a lot of, let's say, hugs and encouragement from very positive media, how heroic and idealistic they are. This is the anti-idealistic idealistic, which means the anti-conceptual, the anti-intellectual ideals. And we see this grow all over the place, and now it's entrenching itself also in the Israeli education system, and I guess in Greece as well, anywhere there is a government control on education.
And you mentioned the precautionary principle. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had the precautionary principle, let's say at the time of the Industrial Revolution? Could you imagine if we went to the brothers who came up with that very early version of the airplane and we told them, prove to us that this airplane is not gonna fall,
crash, or whatever,
that it's not gonna crash? Or if we went to the pioneers of X-rays and told us, prove to us that you're not gonna get enough radioactivity. But there is risk in everything pioneering you do. There is risk in everything new that you do. And of course, notice how Ayn Rand predicted even the precautionary principle 40 years before the precautionary principle. Remember Reardon Metal. What does the Science Institute say? The Science Institute says, look, we cannot prove to you that the Reardon Bridge will collapse. But can Reardon prove to us that the bridge is not going to collapse at some point in the future? What does it mean at some point in the future? In 5,000 years, in 30 years, in 5 months? Well, can you prove it? So this is a mockery. This is a mockery of anything that has to do with how you reach conclusions, with how you reach. It's a mockery of objectivity. This idea that prove to me that at no point there's going to be no problem with that. By the way, we saw this also with the vaccines. I was reading the other day what a mistake it was that at some point we stopped giving the AstraZeneca vaccine to people in Europe because of something like the precautionary principle. Prove to us that this vaccine is not going to have X and X. So many people suffered or even died unnecessarily because, again, the powers that be in Europe took the so-called precautionary principle. Which, by the way, it would be okay if someone said, I don't want to take the risk. The AstraZeneca vaccine doesn't sound to me so good, whatever. But someone else taking this decision for you, this stuff literally costs lives.
Yeah. And we created the regulatory states that actually prolong every endeavor, every project, every sometimes I'm using the example of the Empire State Building that was built in a year and a quarter, a year and few months, all 103 stairs of it, while a lousy apartment in the outskirts of Tel Aviv take 13 years to get from permit to key, which means something amazing that we managed to actually limited ourselves and our ability to develop, to grow. And there is a constant race between the producers who make our life easier and the politicians and the intellectuals and the technocrats who are trying to slow us down. And one of the best methods to slow us down is the green movement.
Let's hear from Amit.
Yeah.
I have a few questions. The first of one is about the free market and the bureaucracy. One of anti-environmental from the experience, and the real one is the bureaucracy, because it's spends so much energy, paper, and so on. For instance, we need this the COVID-19 to have to do something from distance online and not to spend fuel to drive to the offices and all of this. This is one example. So, and the biggest example is the Soviet Union, if we follow the pollution and this. So, this is one question.
So in Soviet Union, the pollution was at such a level that in these ships, in these boats that were travel through the rivers where the middle class, whatever middle class was in Soviet Union, would go to their dachas and stuff, you would see in the boats signs that says, don't dispose your cigarette in the river. And the problem was not that there would be cigarettes in the river, the problem would be that the river would catch fire because it was so polluted. Of course, we had examples of river catching fire also in the United States in the 60s. So, but the question is then, do the politicians really care about the environment and all that stuff? Because otherwise, as you said, why they have, and I don't know which is worse. Is it worse that they don't care about the environment and they pretend that they care, so they get moral authority from this? So they say, okay, there is no more anymore left and right. There is no, people don't, we don't represent like an ideology or something. What is the next bandwagon that we can jump on to capitalize in terms of authority? And environmentalism is one of these bandwagons.
Yeah.
Or is it worse if they actually took it seriously? So I think the problem is that some of them actually do take it seriously, but even if they don't take it seriously, it works because it gives them this moral authority. So it is always interesting to point to someone, oh, you're a hypocrite, but I don't consider it a very successful weapon, because saying to someone you're a hypocrite implies that the underlying principle is good, but you don't follow it. So I don't think that the underlying principle is very good. So I don't know if I would say that the states are hypocrites. I would definitely say, though, that they stand in the way of solutions. They stand in the way of ways that we could do various things that would actually many technologies would develop faster without the regulatory burden.
Yeah, and of course there is I think that there is the moral need to hang on to something that will present you as a moral crusader. And there is a moral popular need to have some kind of integrating religion, integrating set of ideas that direct your action toward a better world. And this is part of the power of this movement. And of course, this means also that a lot of little bothering facts are omitted on the way because they are disturbing the picture that people like to see. For example, we raise from time to time we have a forum of rational environmentalism, and we raise the issue of what do we do with all the solar panel. Because solar panel have about 15, 20 years of life, and at the end of life you have to get rid of it, and if you do the calculation of how much you will need in order to replace replace the needs for energy that you want to cut, it's mean a huge amount. It's mean millions of, hundreds of millions of units of it in Israel alone. And then what do you do with it? This is quite a big waste junk pile that have a lot of hazardous material and heavy metals, and you cannot recycle, and you're going to do quite a big pollution, create a pollution problem by presenting yourself as somebody who protect the environment. So this is part of the thing that since it's 20 years along the road, nobody talk about it nowadays, but it will come to haunt us as well, like the power outage and the failure of the electricity network. And I believe that when people don't understand something on an intellectual level and they don't get the story that Ayn Rand tell them, they will feel it much stronger when they will sit at the dark in a blackout, and they will remember that it wasn't used to be like that in the old days.
Well, my final takeaway in terms of what we have to remember from this essay is that ideas have consequences. And these consequences always add up. Like, ideas are powerful. That's the mistake that many, particularly supposed defenders of capitalism have today. That, well, okay, they don't really mean it. No, it doesn't even matter whether you really mean it. Like, we could ask, did the communists really mean it to kill millions of people? No, most of them, there wasn't like a plan. They didn't start the day by saying, okay, I'm going to kill millions of people. But quite often, your ideas have some consequences that's where they lead. If you want to have equality and Jonathan has more than Boaz, then Jonathan needs to be liquidated. Or if, for example, the cheapest form and the most reliable and affordable and plentiful form of energy has an impact on the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere, then we have to get rid of this. What happens when you get rid of cheap energy? Well, we are seeing it, and we're going to see it even worse in next winter. Ideas have consequences, so let's be on the lookout for bad ideas.
Yeah, I think this is a good tune to close the meeting with, and a good statement, and go home, consider that ideas matters, and check your premises, as Ayn Rand used to say.
And I will see all of you in Israel at some point in June.
In
Am
June,
I right,
in
Boaz?
14th of June, we will all have the pleasure of meeting Nikos face to face and presenting something which is much better than Giro, as Jonathan say. Okay, so thank you, Nico, and have a productive evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nikos.
Bye, Israel.
Bye, see you soon.
Bye-bye. להתראות ליאור.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.